The first aviator to visit Lord Howe Island was Francis Chichester. In 1967, he was knighted for his various long-distance journeys, initially in aircraft and later in yachts. Chichester named all his yachts after a machine from his early life, the de Havilland Gypsy Moth. In 1928, Chichester flew his Gypsy Moth from England to Australia. This image shows him coming in over Mascot, Sydney. He then shipped the Gypsy Moth to New Zealand, where he had a timber felling business that he'd started on a previous visit. His itchy feet obviously got the better of him. He decided he'd have a go at crossing the Tasman Sea. Of course, with the machine's limited range, he had to use Lord Howe and Norfolk Islands to accomplish the journey to the east coast of Australia. Norfolk Island did not get a runway till World War II, and Lord Howe Island not till 1974. So not only did his navigation have to be accurate, he needed to fit floats to his little Gypsy Moth. He made it to his first destination, Norfolk Island, with little drama. The aircraft was then hoisted ashore for some minor repairs. He then completed the second leg of his journey from Norfolk to Lord Howe Island. This image shows the machine on the lagoon on the 1st of April 1931. The local people advised Chichester that he should bring the aircraft ashore and secure it on the bank. He said that would delay his departure in the morning, and he'd prefer to leave it moored on the lagoon. Chichester must have regretted not taking the locals' advice. Overnight, the wind picked up and flipped the light aircraft upside down, engine underwater, timber frame bashed off the bottom and sodden, obviously wrecked beyond repair. Francis Chichester sadly wrote off any opportunity of completing his journey across the Tasman. This is where he underestimated the industrious nature of this island community tucked away from the rest of the world. People who live in isolation are driven to be industrious. Francis Chichester possibly couldn't have come to a better place to initially wreck and then repair his aeroplane. This image shows Chichester working on one of the wings and Minnie Dignam, a local girl, stitching up the fabric that covered the framework. On the 10th of June 1931, the aircraft was refloated and Chichester completed his journey to the east coast of Australia. He became the first to cross the Tasman Sea from east to west using Lord Howe and Norfolk Island as stopovers. In 1942, the first military aircraft, a Royal Australian Air Force Catalina, arrived to perform the first medical evacuation from Lord Howe Island. In April 1943, the island people were surprised by the visit of Empire-class flying boat ZKAMC named Awarua. The Tasman Empire Airlines machine had experienced electrical problems and called by the island to conduct repairs. Teal operated 2 of these machines across the Tasman in the 1940s. The Royal Australian Air Force Catalinas continued to visit Lord Howe right through World War II till the early 1950s. Not only to perform medical evacuations, they also brought doctors, dentists, teachers, mail, freight, even local residents returning to or from their island home. During these many visits, the aircrew built strong friendships with the island people. They also got to enjoy the many activities of the island, including the wonderful fishing. One of the island's worst tragedies occurred on the night of the 28th of September 1948, when Air Force Catalina A24381 crashed at Old Settlement Beach after experiencing fuel problems. Of the crew of 9, sadly 7 Air Force men lost their lives that night. "60 years on, in 2008, the wreckage of this machine can still be viewed above Old Settlement Beach on the island." On the eve of the 50th anniversary of the crash, this monument, the propeller and plaque below were erected as a memory to the crew that died in the tragedy. The plaque has an inscription which reads, "Dedicated to the men and women of Australia's Defence Forces who have served this island and their country, especially the crew of Royal Australian Air Force Catalina flying boat A24381, which crashed at Lord Howe Island on September 28, 1948. August 1947 saw the beginning of the first commercial operation of flying boats to and from Lord Howe Island. Brian Monkton, a former Royal Australian Air Force Catalina pilot, purchased 5 ex-Air Force Sunderlands and commenced his airline Transoceanic Airways. On the 1st of August 1947, Transoceanic Airways began commercial operations to the island, this being the beginning of modern tourism, which today is the main industry of Lord Howe Island. The vessel seen alongside this Transoceanic Airways Sunderland is the Albatross. In 2008, she's still used on a regular basis. Lord Howe Island has had 3 aeroplanes land on it before a runway was completed. The first, in October 1947, an American-designed air coupe piloted by New Zealander Harry Newton was crossing the Tasman Sea. Initially via Norfolk Island, he diverted to Lord Howe for repairs. After a short stay on Lagoon Beach, he took off and flew direct to New Zealand, believed to be one of the smallest horse-powered aircraft to cross the Tasman Sea. In December 1947, Qantas commenced operations to Lord Howe Island, using 2 former Royal Australian Air Force Catalinas. In a short time, things had changed dramatically for the island people. Imagine going from 6 to 8 weekly shipping service and then to not 1 but 2 major airlines bringing passengers, mail, freight to and from your island home. The rare colour footage that follows was filmed by Hugh Hamilton, a Transoceanic Airways first officer. It shows the visit of one of their Sunderlands to Lord Howe Island in the late 1940s.
Far away on the sea, there's an island, the island of my dreams. I just long for the day when I'll be there.
In June 1949, a dramatic event occurred when one of the Qantas Catalinas, VHEAX, was washed ashore as the result of a severe storm. Catalina was too badly damaged to be repaired, so what was of use was salvaged, the hull was taken to sea and scuttled. Those ever-industrious islanders never let anything go to waste. Some components were put to good use on the island. Most of the wing was taken across to the eastern side of the island, where it was used as a retaining wall on the road to the popular Ned's Beach. It was perhaps as a result of this incident that Qantas made a couple of flights to the island using their much bigger Sandringhams. By late 49, Qantas had given up on the Lord Howe Island service, and at the early 50s given up flying boat operations altogether. Transoceanic Airways continued to operate the service to Lord Howe until 1953. Then, when due to the high cost of operating flying boats, the company went into liquidation and ceased to exist. Ansett Airlines purchased Transoceanic Airways assets and began in 1953 what was to be a 21-year service operating to and from Lord Howe Island. The footage that follows shows one of the early visits by Ansett Flying Boat Services VHAKP, a former Transoceanic Airways Sunderland, initially leaving Rose Bay to arriving on the clear waters of the island's lagoon. In late 1953, Ansett purchased two Sandringhams. This machine, a former Teal aircraft, became VHBRC. She was to fly to and from Lord Howe Island for the next 21 years and closed the service on the 10th of September 1974. The second aircraft was purchased from Qantas. She became VHBRE Pacific Chieftain. Here she is on the hard stand on the shores of Rose Bay, Sydney Harbour. The flying boats, of course, were a wonderful mode of transport to fly to and from the naturally spectacular Lord Howe Island. People consider the flight from Sydney Harbour to Lord Howe Island as one of the most impressive journeys of their entire lives. For the first 10 years, Ansett operated virtually trouble-free. This was all to change when in July 1963, Pacific Chieftain was washed ashore in a violent storm. She wasn't too badly damaged, but as can be seen in this image, the port float had been knocked off. Due to a deteriorating weather forecast, it was decided to move the aircraft from approximately the middle of the lagoon up to a northerly mooring off Old Settlement Beach. Island improvisation played its part. Sandbags were placed above the good starboard float to act as a counterweight for the missing port float. Unfortunately, in combination with the weather and the extra weight above the float, it also collapsed. The aircraft was now damaged beyond repair. Pacific Chieftain was hauled up onto the beach and salvage began. A search was also commenced for a replacement aircraft. Many islanders who worked on Pacific Chieftain had also played their part in the salvage of Francis Chichester's Gypsy Moth at the same location some 30 years earlier. The once proud Pacific Chieftain, now stripped of all usable items, was towed 10 nautical miles to the west of the island, where she was scuttled and sank gracefully to a watery grave. A replacement machine was found closer to home than many would think. The Royal New Zealand Air Force had retired their military Sunderlands in 1959. Ansett purchased one of these machines, NZ4108. Of course, this machine was a military Sunderland. The Ansett engineers converted her to Sandringham configuration using many items salvaged from the previously wrecked Pacific Chieftain. This converted Sunderland, VHBRF, was christened Islander. While now a civil airliner, she held on to her military pass with her bulbous Sunderland-like nose. Islander was to follow Pacific Chieftain's web footprints in more ways than one. In May 1965, she was also washed ashore, very close to where Pacific Chieftain had previously come to grief. VHBRF was not as badly damaged as her predecessor. After only 10 or so days on the beach, repairs were made and the aircraft was flown back to Sydney for a more thorough inspection. In March 1968, the islanders were surprised by the overhead arrival of a Fletcher crop duster. This aircraft was crossing the Tasman from New Zealand via Norfolk Island and had run into an unpredicted headwind around Lord Howe and needed somewhere to land. The aeroplane got down safely on a strip of grass parallel to Lagoon Beach. The local children all came out to see the machine. Of course, an aeroplane with wheels would be very unique to the children of Lord Howe Island. After a couple of days' stay, the weather was suitable for the aircraft to leave. This image shows most of the island community watching the aircraft during its takeoff roll from the island's cricket oval. In the early 1970s, the Australian government decided to build an airstrip on Lord Howe Island. At the beginning of 1974, the Australian Army was given the contract to build the runway and commenced the construction of a 3,000-foot strip at the southern end of the island. Of course, the construction of an airstrip meant the end of the flying boat era. The faithful islander and beachcomber were put up for sale. The former Royal New Zealand Air Force Sunderland, named Islander in Anset's care, had served the island for over 11 years. Beachcomber, of course, had a more impressive record. She had flown to and from the island for 21 consecutive years. She is seen here taking off in front of island launch Lulawai. In May 1974, it seemed as if the island made its claim to the flying boats, when Beachcomber was washed ashore at the southern end of Lagoon Beach. Of course, the Army were on the island building the airstrip, and so they and their machines played a big part in the salvage and repair of this machine. In the 32 years that marine aircraft visited Lord Howe Island, 7 were washed ashore or damaged due to weather. Of these machines, only 2 were lost, a very impressive record when you consider the exposed and open nature of the island. Beachcomber was pulled above the high tide mark. The footage that follows shows the Army and Ansett engineers working towards repairing and refloating the aircraft. After an extensive effort, the aircraft was ready. The engines were run up and she was prepared to return to one of her more natural elements, the water. The events that led to the christening of one of Australia's easterlymost airstrips were not planned. A serious injury had occurred to a local resident. Due to strong winds, the flying boats were ruled out. So the Royal Australian Air Force was contacted and a caribou was dispatched to perform the medical evacuation. Due to the strong crosswinds, 5 landing attempts were made. The footage that follows shows one of those missed attempts and the eventual landing of what was to be the first aeroplane to land on Lord Howe Island's runway. Due to the severe gusts, the aircraft was actually tethered to one of the Army's multi-rollers while she was refueled and prepared for takeoff. With the construction of the airstrip being completed, the days of the flying boats were now numbered. The following extracts were written by Jim Whistler, who for many years produced the island's paper, The Signal. The boats have made more than 5,000 flights to the island and have brought close to 200,000 tourists to our shores. Our whole way of life has been linked to the flying boat service. We will carry on without the flying boats. We must look to the future with confidence, but I doubt if any of us realise just how much we are going to miss the boats. The Flagstaff Hill was crowded as Beachcomber took off towards the southwest, turned, banked over Dawson's Point and headed for the Flagstaff, and then flew right along the lagoon that had been the site for so many graceful landings. There was no cheer from those on Flagstaff Hill, but there were heavy hearts and many a tear. While flying boats no longer visit Lord Howe Island, the local museum houses a number of interesting items from the era. A Sandringham float was restored over an 8-year period by the Royal Australian Air Force's 10 Squadron. This extensive partial restoration incorporated a number of perspex panels so the interior construction can be viewed. Ten Squadron was formed before World War II and flew Sunderland flying boats throughout the war. The next sequence shows this float outside the old museum building in 1998, before its restoration was commenced. This is the float in the museum grounds, and as you can see, it's not in too bad a condition. Some of the dents and damage from when it was washed ashore in a storm in 1974. At that time it was attached to a Sandringham BRC beachcomber inside. Bit of leaf matter and so forth. Bit of corrosion around the end of it. I'd say it's about 6 metres long by a metre high. By a metre wide, sorry, by about 1.5 metres high. Here's the pallet I've got that I'm going to put it on. The museum also houses 2 large models of Royal Australian Air Force Catalina A24381 and Anset's Beachcomber. These models were made, then donated by Gold Coast aero modeller Jeff Reichelt. During his visit, Jeff flew his model Sunderland off the clear waters of the island's lagoon.
Have another. Oh, this one. So if I take charge, we don't have gear handles down here. Gang bar emergency switches are up. Fuel transfer switches. Pumps are off. Ignition switch. Master on, wings up. Yep. Fuel tanks moved. Fuel selectors are on main. Yep. Flaps are up. Yep. Mixture. Outro. Throttles. Set. Throttle friction. Set. Supercharger. Low lock. Hydraulic bypass. Property clamp switch. Unfeather on reverse switches. Circuit breaker.
Driggs, Idaho, and picked up the airplane. Went to Seattle, Washington, Yakutak, Alaska, Nome, Alaska. From Nome, Alaska to Sapporo, Japan, which was our longest flight of 17.5 hours. From Sapporo to Kochi, Japan. Kochi, Japan to Okinawa, to Manila, to Brunei, Bali, and from Bali to Brunei, Australia, Brunei to Geraldton, Geraldton to Perth, Perth to Adelaide, Adelaide to Hobart, Tasmania, Tasmania to Christchurch, Christchurch to Ardmore, and changed the oil there. It was about 100 hours by the time we left from home. From there to Auckland, from Auckland to Sydney, Sydney to Lord Howe Island.
Aviation.